Imagine a silent, completely invisible killer just lurking in the soil beneath your feet. A
Yeah.
threat so severe that it can, destroy almost half of your plantation's profit in just 6 months.
Yeah, it's a terrifying scenario.
Right. But imagine that the most surprising weapon being used to fight this invisible killer is just, well, a combination of agricultural trash and microscopic fungus. Stick with us today because the key takeaway on how to fundamentally protect your crop is coming right near the end, and you are definitely going to want to hear it.
Absolutely.
Welcome to another podcast episode brought to you by AGS Agriculture Global Solutions, where we discuss sustainable oil palm cultivation topics.
And we modify today's podcast slightly by asking you, our listener, a big favor.
Yeah, we work very hard to transform scientific research into information that is easy to understand, so that this research does not stay on a piece of paper somewhere.
Exactly. But it is brought to you, the farmers, and you can use this information to improve the productivity of your oil palms.
And also eventually your livelihoods.
Yeah.
We are really dedicated to this mission.
We truly are. However, we rely on our own resources in this work because at the moment, we do not have any support, neither from the government nor from anybody else.
And we want to make it clear we are not asking any money from you.
No, definitely not. We're only asking you to subscribe to our channel and give likes under our podcast episodes.
Yeah, this will help us develop our channel faster because, well, this is how YouTube works. We have good engagement from the audience, and YouTube promotes our podcast to new farmers.
Right. And the larger our community is, the easier it is for us to provide you with the high-quality information on oil palm topics.
So please, hit that subscribe button now. This is the best you can do for us if you like what we do for you.
Thank you so much for your support.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so let's get right into today's deep dive. Our mission today is to unpack a really fascinating 2026 paper published in the journal Agriscientifica by Narula and colleagues.
It's a great paper.
It really is. We are looking at a detailed study that explores a novel, eco-friendly way to protect and basically boost your oil palm seedlings before they even reach the main field.
That is the perfect way to frame it. I mean, this research tackles a devastating disease that anyone managing a plantation is unfortunately very familiar with, basal stem rot.
Or BSR.
Right, BSR. The study tests how a beneficial fungus called Trichoderma mixed with empty fruit bunches, which we will just refer to as EFB moving forward, might actually serve as the ultimate organic armor for your young plants.
Okay, let's unpack this. Before we get into the actual mechanics of the experiment, we need to establish the sheer scale of the battlefield here. For the farmers listening, oil palm is your livelihood, but on a global scale, it is just an absolute giant.
Oh, massive.
Yeah, the source study highlights that major producing regions account for over half of all global edible oil exports.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about an industry providing jobs for over 16 million people worldwide.
Right. And the oil produced is vital for everything. Cooking oil, cosmetics, and it is increasingly critical for alternative energy too.
Yeah, with biodiesel mixtures pushing toward a 35% mandate now.
Exactly. It is an agricultural cornerstone, which means when a threat enters the picture, the economic ripple effects are just massive. And the villain of today's deep dive is Ganoderma gonenense.
Just the name sounds intimidating.
It really does. It's a highly aggressive soil-borne fungus, and it's the primary pathogen responsible for basal stem rot.
And from what I'm reading here, it doesn't just, make the plant a little sick or stunt its growth.
Yeah.
This fungus is absolutely ruthless to the physical structure of the palm.
Ruthless is definitely the right word. To understand why it's so destructive, we have to look at what Ganoderma does on a cellular level.
Okay, lay it on me.
It produces these highly specialized enzymes that literally degrade the lignin and cellulose within the oil palm.
And lignin is what makes the trunk stiff, right?
Yes. Think of lignin as the steel rebar inside a concrete pillar. It gives the plant its structural integrity. The fungus is actively eating that structural foundation.
So the trunk is essentially just turning to mush from the inside out.
Precisely. First, the older leaves start to turn yellow, which is a condition known as chlorosis, because the nutrient pathways are being completely severed.
Right.
Then the base of the stem begins to rot entirely. By the time the actual fruiting body of the fungus, that little mushroom bracket appears on the outside of the trunk, the internal damage is catastrophic.
And the economic hit is huge.
Massive. This disease can lead to an economic loss of 43% in an infected area in just 6 months. It translates to devastating losses measured in tons per hectare.
Wow.
And because it spreads stealthily through the soil via root-to-root contact and decaying plant debris, it's incredibly difficult to eradicate once it takes hold.
I look at it like a silent termite infestation in the foundation of a house. You're painting the walls, you're fixing the roof, everything looks pristine on the outside. But underneath, the support beams are turning to dust, and suddenly the floor just gives out.
That's a great analogy.
That's what Ganoderma does to an oil palm.
Okay.
So if a farmer sees this threat, the instinct is probably to just reach for a heavy-duty synthetic chemical fungicide, right? Just nip it in the bud.
That has historically been the reflex, yeah. But the researchers note that chemical controls are largely ineffective in actual field conditions.
Really? Why is that?
Well, the soil is a complex, dense matrix. Pumping chemicals into it rarely reaches the deep fungal networks effectively. Furthermore, those chemicals carry massive environmental risks.
Right, the runoff.
Exactly. They contaminate the local water table, they obliterate the non-target beneficial organisms in the soil, and eventually the pathogen just mutates and builds resistance anyway.
Which forces researchers to look for an organic hero. Enter our biocontrol agent, the Trichoderma species. But they didn't just unleash the fungus on its own. They paired it with EFB, right? A nutrient-rich waste product from the palm oil milling process.
Correct.
Now, I have to be honest, fighting a destructive fungus with a different fungus and feeding it agricultural trash sounds like a bizarre strategy. How does that actually work in practice?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, nature often provides the most effective countermeasures to its own threats, provided we set the stage correctly.
Okay.
Trichoderma is a fast-growing, aggressive, beneficial fungus. It is a natural antagonist to Ganoderma. It literally outcompetes the pathogen for space and nutrients.
Like a microscopic turf war.
Exactly. But to thrive and build its numbers, Trichoderma needs a food source and a comfortable habitat.
And that is where the empty fruit bunches come in.
Right. EFB is often treated as a massive, frustrating waste management problem at the mill. You just have these mountains of it sitting there. But biologically, it's a gold mine.
Because of the nutrients?
Yes. EFB contains roughly 1.5% nitrogen, 0.5% phosphorus, 7.3% potassium, and 0.9% magnesium.
Those aren't just random letters. That's the holy trinity of plant growth. NPK, nitrogen for the leaves, phosphorus for root development, and a massive dose of potassium for stress tolerance and, like, water regulation.
You got it. By repurposing this milling waste, you solve an environmental storage problem while simultaneously creating a highly nutritious substrate.
It feeds the good guys.
Exactly. It allows the beneficial Trichoderma to multiply rapidly and establish an impenetrable defensive perimeter around the seedling's roots.
You're basically building a well-stocked fortress and paying a microscopic mercenary army to guard it. That's brilliant.
It really is.
So if Ganoderma is this aggressive, testing an organic defense against it couldn't have been done gently. How severely did the researchers stress test these seedlings?
Oh, they staged a highly controlled biological war in the pre-nursery phase. The study utilized a randomized block design with 40 plant samples in total. They divided these into 5 different treatments with 8 replicates of each.
I see the breakdown here. They had a control group seedlings grown in standard soil without the EFB or the Trichoderma. Then they had 4 active treatment groups, and every single one of these active groups received 5 grams of EFB per polybag.
Right, the EFB was constant across the active groups.
But the variable they tweaked was the dose of Trichoderma. They tested 2 grams, 4 grams, 6 grams, and 8 grams of the beneficial fungus.
And this is where the stress test gets really intense. They didn't just measure growth in a pristine, safe greenhouse. They deliberately introduced the lethal threat.
Oh, wow.
They went out into a heavily diseased field, harvested actual infectious fruiting bodies of Ganoderma, cut them into 1 by 1 centimeter cubes, and planted those pure, concentrated disease cubes right into the soil next to the young seedling roots.
That is wild. It's not just stray spores blowing in the wind. They essentially buried a radioactive block of pure disease right next to the roots.
Basically, yes.
Now, if I'm a farmer managing a pre-nursery, my main concern is time. I want results yesterday because time is money. Did this fungus-trash combination result in explosive supergrowth immediately, or was it a slower process?
It's undeniably a slow burn, which aligns perfectly with how biological systems actually operate beneath the surface. Let's walk through the researchers' timeline. In month 1, they observed almost no significant differences in the overall height or the stem diameter of the seedlings across any of the treatments.
So nothing visually dramatic right out of the gate.
Nothing visible in the height, no. The only notable change was in leaf production. The plants receiving the mid-range 4-gram dose of Trichoderma pushed out the most leaves early on.
Okay.
But by month 2, the physical dynamics started to shift slightly. The plants receiving the highest dose 8 grams of Trichoderma started taking a slight lead in vertical height.
Why the delay, though? What is holding them back in that first month?
What you have to visualize as a grower is the biological reality of what is happening underground. During those first 60 days, the plant roots and the trichoderma are fiercely negotiating a symbiotic relationship.
Oh, I see.
The fungus is physically wrapping around the root architecture. More importantly, it is doing the heavy lifting of breaking down that EFB. That invisible underground foundation building takes critical time before it ever translates into visible vertical top growth.
They're building the basement before they build the first floor. That makes total sense.
Exactly.
Which brings us to the end of the observation period, month 3. The final growth results are in, and there is a really fascinating tension here between the physical measurements of the plants and the strict laboratory math.
Very true.
Looking at the physical plants, by the 3rd month, the mid-range doses, so the 4-gram and 6-gram treatments, produce the tallest seedlings, averaging right around 35 to 36 centimeters.
Right.
Meanwhile, the high 8-gram dose produced the highest total number of leaves. Stem diameter, interestingly, stayed completely uniform across all the treatments, averaging around 6.5 to 6.8 millimeters.
Those are the physical observations. But then we hit the twist in the data. The researchers ran their strict statistical calculations to see if these differences were massively undeniable.
And what did the math say?
The strict lab math showed that the growth differences between the treated plants and the control group were not yet considered statistically huge.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because if the strict math says the results aren't a massive leap, any rigorous scientist would normally throw the data out. Why should you, the listener, even care about this treatment? I mean, if the math doesn't back it up, aren't we just looking at a plant placebo effect? A fluke where some plants just happen to grow a millimeter taller?
What's fascinating here is the crucial distinction between an arbitrary mathematical threshold and a clear, observable biological mechanism.
Okay, break that down.
In agricultural science, a lack of mathematical pop in a very short 3-month window absolutely does not mean the biological process is a failure or a placebo. The underlying mechanism at play is deeply understood. We know exactly how it works. Trichoderma produces highly specialized compounds called cellulase enzymes.
Enzymes that do what exactly?
They act as a chemical wrecking ball. The EFB trash is tough. It is lignocellulosic matter, meaning the nutrients are locked away inside a hard, complex structure that the plant roots just can't access on their own.
Right, it's woody.
Yes. So the trichoderma excretes these cellulase enzymes, which actively speed up the decomposition of the organic matter. The fungus is literally unlocking the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium trapped inside the EFB and converting it into a bioavailable form.
So the fungus is basically acting like a microscopic stomach, digesting the trash outside the plant so the roots can just absorb a liquid smoothie of pure nutrients.
That is a fantastic way to visualize it. It's pre-digesting the food. The trend of improved vegetative growth is absolutely visible in the measurements. The math simply indicates that to prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt in a laboratory setting, you would need a larger sample size, or, honestly, more importantly, a longer timeline.
Right.
You simply cannot rush biological decomposition. 3 months is a blink of an eye for a tree that will live for decades.
I love that. The growth is real, it just hasn't crossed the artificial finish line set by the statisticians yet. But let's pivot from the height data to the original primary purpose of this entire experiment. We have to talk about the invisible war. The BSR disease.
Yes, the main event.
The researchers deliberately planted those highly toxic Ganoderma cubes right next to the fragile seedling roots. I would expect a total massacre by month 3. So what happened?
This is perhaps the most revealing part of the study. After 3 full months of intentional, close-quarters exposure to the Ganoderma pathogen, none of the seedlings showed any signs of basal stem rot. Not a single one.
Hold on if I'm hearing you right. Not even the untreated control group, the plants that had absolutely zero trichoderma protection.
Correct. Even the vulnerable control group showed 0 signs of BSR. There was no white mycelium growing on the roots and no necrotic rotting of the internal root tissue.
Did the plants show any stress at all?
I mean, some plants did develop minor leaf spots, but when the researchers analyzed those spots, they identified them as a completely different common leaf spot disease. It was totally unrelated to the Ganoderma cubes buried in the soil.
Wait. So the villain didn't even show up to the battle. Did the Trichoderma actually hold the line, or did the researchers just run out of time on the clock before the disease could attack?
It is entirely a matter of running out of time, and this highlights the incredibly sneaky, dangerous nature of soil-borne pathogens. Ganoderma has a notoriously long latent period.
Explain that latent period. What is actually happening during that time?
A latent period means the biological clock of the infection is ticking, but there are no visible alarms. The fungus can be present in the soil, and its microscopic threads can even begin the early colonization of the plant's outer root layers without triggering any visible symptoms above ground.
That's terrifying.
It is. The plant does not even know it's dying yet. 3 months is simply not enough time for this specific disease to manifest the classic, devastating signs like the severe yellowing of older leaves or the structural root rot.
Oh, that makes the disease so much more dangerous in the real world. Think about it. You're a farmer. You are walking the rows of your pre-nursery. The sun is shining. The canopy looks incredibly green. The leaves are vibrant. You might look at those 3-month-old seedlings and feel total confidence that your crop is perfect.
Right, because visually they are.
But underneath the soil, entirely invisible to you, that Ganoderma is quietly spreading its network, breaching the outer defenses of the roots. By the time you see the yellow leaves, or worse, that little mushroom fruiting body on the stem a year or two later in the main field, the fungus has been silently eating the inside of your plant for months. The battle wasn't just lost, it was lost before you even knew it started.
You have painted the exact nightmare scenario that oil palm growers face. Once you see the mushroom, the structural integrity of the palm is already compromised. You're going to lose tons per hectare in yield from that sector.
Unbelievable.
And that brings us directly to the practical application of this research. What are the clear operational field instructions for you, the grower, listening to this deep dive today?
Right, so what does this all mean for you? If the 3-month window was completely insufficient to definitively prove the disease suppression because the pathogen is just so slow, do you still take the time to implement this ESB and fungus mixture on your farm tomorrow?
The short answer is an absolute overwhelming yes. Combining EFB waste with a Trichoderma inoculant is highly recommended as a standard operational practice for your organic media preparation.
Even without the math?
Yes. Think about the multi-layered benefits you are achieving. First, you are drastically improving the physical aeration and structure of your pre-nursery soil with the organic matter. Second, you are providing a steady, slow-release source of vital macronutrients.
The NPK.
Exactly. And most importantly, you are establishing a massive beneficial microbial army in the root zone before that plant ever gets transferred out into the main field where the Ganoderma is inevitably waiting in the soil.
It's like taking daily probiotics and a high-quality multivitamin. If you take them every morning for a month, you're probably not going to be able to mathematically prove that they stopped you from catching a specific cold on a random Tuesday. The math won't support it. But your baseline biological resilience, your internal armor, is undeniably stronger. When the virus does show up, your immune system has a standing army ready to fight.
That is a perfect analogy. You are investing in baseline resilience. So for your actionable steps, start integrating Trichoderma mixed with EFB in your pre-nursery polybags. Based on the biological trends in this study, the mid-range doses, specifically 4 to 6 grams of Trichoderma mixed with a small handful, roughly 5 grams, of composted EFB per seedling show the best overall balance for driving height and establishing the plant's architecture.
So don't overdo it.
Right. You do not need to waste money overdoing it with massive 8-gram doses. That 4 to 6 gram range is your sweet spot for operational efficiency.
By the way, quick note on baseline health. Doing regular soil testing for acidity and nutrient content, along with consistent leaf testing, is absolutely essential here. You have to know what your baseline is before you add these treatments. If your soil is highly acidic, it's going to impact how well the Trichoderma can actually establish itself.
I am so glad you brought that up. Soil pH heavily influences the efficacy of any biological control. This raises an important question for modern agriculture. How do we balance our intense short-term expectations for immediate visual growth with the long-term, inherently slow-moving biological realities of soil health?
Yeah.
We've been conditioned to want a chemical quick fix that greens up a plant in a week, but true resilience takes months, if not years, to properly culture.
And it forces us to completely rethink our relationship with what we call waste. Those empty fruit bunches sitting in massive rotting piles at the back of the mill are not garbage. They are the raw fuel for your plantation's immune system. If you take the time to compost them, break them down, and inoculate them with a beneficial biocontrol agent, you are closing the loop on your own farm.
Exactly.
You are turning your own byproducts into organic armor that saves your bottom line.
It is the very definition of sustainable cultivation. We know that Ganoderma is a relentless pathogen. We know it will drastically reduce your yields if left unchecked.
Hmm.
But proactive pre-nursery management gives your palms a fighting chance.
Right. You want the Trichoderma completely dominating the physical space around the root system so that when the Ganoderma finally tries to invade from the surrounding soil, there is literally no room and no food left for it to consume.
It's a microscopic turf war. And your job as the grower is simply to make sure your side has overwhelming numbers and supplies before the main battle even begins.
Well said.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a larger philosophical question to mull over as you walk your fields tomorrow. We just saw a study where a pathogen as destructive as Ganoderma can hide silently in the soil, entirely invisible to the naked eye, slowly creeping toward the roots for months on end without showing a single symptom above ground.
It's sobering.
If that is true, are our standard agricultural research timelines fundamentally too short? If we judge success or failure in 3-month windows, what other invisible wars are happening in the soil beneath our feet right now, at this very second, that we simply aren't patient enough to observe? It really makes you look at the dirt under your boots a little differently, doesn't it? It certainly does. Biology operates on its own ancient schedule, entirely indifferent to our quarterly profit margins.
Thanks for listening.